Well, I'm here and got to carry all this clubber down, as an artist does. And the camera stuff as well. And the light's into my eyes a bit too much at the moment. I want to paint actually with the light as it is. It's better this way. I'll have a look. Favourite spot for the moment, anywhere in the world, just here. Autumn colours now, beautiful. I don't think I can paint this scene because the sun's smacking my eyes today, but I will another time because the reflections are beautiful. After toing and froing, I've set myself up here so I can sit on my little seat there, paint and just reach the paints okay. Set out the oils and the scene we're going to do. This one reaching from these trees here right across to the sculpture here and just down to this stone here and up into the sky. Sun's just coming over. Could be a bit of a nuisance, but I'm hoping we'll be able to see alright. And the sound in the background's a bit further away this time, so I'm hoping you'll hear me fine. We'll see. My bottle of terps, my usual set of 9 brushes there, the filberts and the rounds, from 0 through to 10s. As you see, I've got 3 rounds, 2, 4, 2 and 0, and the flats are 10 to 0, going down in 2s. They're long-handled nylon, and they're very nice brushes for the price, Specialist Crafts I use. Got a jar of terps, my 2 plastic palettes, there's 2 pieces of perspex, and a painting knife in case I can use it today. It'd be nice to use a painting knife today a little bit. I'll show you how that can work. On my palette then, let's take a look at the colours. We've got burnt sienna, burnt umber. There is a deep purple there, not much of it left though. Alizarin crimson there, then we've got Prussian blue, ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, cerulean blue. Down here we've got some turquoise, then we've got viridian green, emerald green and a permanent green there, chrome yellow, lemon yellow, yellow ochre. I've got to put some more out on now, cadmium orange, cadmium red and titanium white. So we'll just put a few more bits of paint out. The radio mic with me again. I'm afraid it's in England, so I hope the background noise isn't too much for you. The painting I did yesterday was a large one, and unfortunately I don't feel I can use it for you as a demonstration because the background noise was just too much in the end. So hopefully this one will be alright. I'm not quite sure the direction this one's going yet. I may use a palette knife at the end as well, or the beginning, and see how it goes. Haven't decided. I haven't shown you knife work yet, so this would be a good time, although it's rather a textural, fiddly piece to do. First of all, I want to work out the composition with just a thin coat. Usually I use a thin coat of lighter colour. I might use very light blue this time, so it will disappear easily. It'll vanish as I paint anyway, and I use my fingers like this to make the composition. I'm taking what I need and want. I just about know what I want in this composition already. To do that, I'm going to use a little filbert. I'm going to take a little bit of white. Unfortunately I've got my paints on the opposite side of me this time because I can't reach down as the bank goes down the other side. So I don't want too bright a colour, just a light wash. I'm mixing some cobalt blue with a little bit of titanium white at the moment. I'm showing you all the colours that I'm going to need today. And let's just work this out. Unfortunately I've got the sun coming up into my eyes, which is going to be a bit of a nuisance as I go along, but so often the case when plein air painting, nothing is perfect.
I just want to do a loose drawing at first because really I'm trying to lead my eye into the picture. We're looking here, looking right into perspective, looking up into the distance, and there's another vanishing point coming in from the left as well. So what I want to do now is get the composition correct and make sure everything fits in. Also want to make sure that I leave enough space on the right behind the trees for the light to come through between them and around and behind them when they stand out. So I feel it important to get a fairly good drawing, a strong drawing to start with, even though fairly loosely done, so that I can work my other looser painting within that afterwards. If we start with a good drawing, the loose painting works. If we start with a poor drawing, the loose painting makes it look even worse. Although I've got a central vanishing point, I also have one coming from the left, and we have a path coming down from the left there, trickling down almost like a stream. I'm using a light wash of paint to draw with. In this case it's only cobalt blue and a little bit of white. It doesn't really matter what colour you use as long as you can see it, because you're going to paint it out as you paint over it. Notice how I'm using long handled brushes. This is partly so I can see the colours that I'm using from a distance as I'm painting with an impressionist technique like Monet, and I can see the colours blend one to another. Also it's very handy now when I'm holding the end of the brush, I can hold it right out there and reach out almost like sword fencing to do my drawing nice and loosely and very freely. I can just flick the brush. It's a very nice way to work, and I do prefer these long handled. As Constable did, I'm able to change things around. We're not stuck with what's in front of us. We're not painting from a photograph, we're not copying a photograph. I can move a tree 2 foot, 3 foot to the left, I can move things around to fit within the painting. What actually matters at the end is the finished painting, which we'll see away from the scene. Right, the framework and the skeleton of my composition is now ready, and I'm able to go ahead and paint. We don't need too much details, just the basic outlines and positions of where things are going to go. So let's make a start. So I'm going to start with my midtones and work from my midtones outwards towards the darks and towards the lights. I want to make sure that my cools are in the distance, that our colour hues, our greens in the distance are bluer and cooler, and as I come forward they become warmer and warmer. We're going to have the sun coming up soon and it's going to be changing, so that's going to make a lot of difference. This sunlight is vital to this picture. It's going to cascade down through the trees, reflecting off each one, reflecting in the water, reflecting one thing to another constantly right the way through the painting. This will give a coherence to our painting of one colour coming into another. We don't just have brown trees, blue sky, green leaves and so on. We have the blue coming into the leaves, the blue coming into the water, the brown coming into the water and so on. And it gives a complete coherence. I'm going to start with a 1/2 inch filbert, which is narrow one way, wide the other. So we'll start to make the colours in the background first. We have some lovely warm and cool blues and greens going on. So I'll dampen and soften my brush with a little white spirit, and then we'll start with some cobalt, with a little touch of rose into that. No, I've changed my mind and we'll use a little magenta instead. Make it very light coming to the background at first. Notice how I'm using my brush from the very start. I'm tickling those colours in and using the brush in the direction of the objects I'm painting. I'm making the marks about the things I'm painting from the very start, and also varying the colour slightly, with a little lighter here, a little darker there. There's a lot of terps in my paint at the moment. I'm using it very thinly, almost like watercolour. At present I'm painting just an effect of light. I'm letting the dark glow through. I'm painting the paint in various degrees of thickness and thinness, as well as textures. But unlike watercolour, I'm painting in the reverse. I'm painting the light in between my trees, letting the dark of the trees stand out, gradually working across there to the right, and you can see why I wanted that tree to be in from the edge slightly, so that the light stands out on that right-hand edge, leaving the tree. Using the paint thinly like this and gradually building it up is called fat over lean. So I'm using a thin glaze of paint and gradually using more and more of the paint into the mixture and painting the fatter or the heavier paint, the more impasto paint, over the top. This is another reason for using the correct brushes. If we use a brush that's too stiff, it will draw the paint off, drag the paint off and go through the paint. If it's too soft, it will clog up. Using these nice medium filberts, these nylon brushes, I can delicately touch heavier paint over the surface, over and over again, by tickling it on, without lifting the paint. The white paint in the matting is also called a body colour. It thickens the paint, it makes it more opaque. So this thin glaze that I'm doing with added white is also becoming slightly more opaque and slightly thicker.
Yes, we're going to have the sky just coming down through here. The sky is going to be coming up somewhere around here, I think. Up into there. We can let the light shine down through there later. Going to come down through here.
Now I decide to paint some of the light stream in the background. Normally I don't put these highlights in until towards the end of a painting, but in this one I've decided to use some white, a little tint of some cerulean blue in it, and make the cascade of the trickling water coming down this stream here, the sparkling light as the sun comes through onto it, just to give an idea of our tones and how the lights and darks will work, give you a better idea as well. But normally, as I say, I would leave these lights until the end of the painting. Often when starting a landscape I tend to start at the horizon line and up into the sky because that tends to be the very mid-tone. In this case I don't have a horizon line for the sky. So now I'm going to start doing the sky with pure cerulean and a little touch of white into it. The lower down I come, the lighter it'll be, the higher up I go, the darker it'll be and the warmer it'll be, so I'll add more pure colour further up. You can see here I start breaking in between the areas of the trees. I continue making my brush strokes about the area that I'm working in, so if there's a broken edge, then I have a broken edge with my brush. If I'm painting in between trees and leaves, then it'll either be a straighter edge against the trunk or against the leaves it'll be a more broken. I want much purer colour now, much brighter, stronger colour, so you note that I'm painting much more impasto, thicker, purer mixtures of paint, so that the black doesn't show through and I get this brilliance of the sky and that luminosity. As the morning progresses, the sunlight moves around and begins to stream through the trees down here. Beautiful. So I need to make new colours to go in the background. I'm going to use some cobalt blue and some emerald green with a little touch of white to start making this background colour and painting in between the trunks of the trees so I can still see where my basic drawings are. Notice I'm doing the texturing in the background first of all. There were little tiny soft brush strokes. This is where these soft nylon filberts really come into their own. You notice here that I'm able to just tickle that paint in. I can blend it by pushing a bit harder or working over again. I can paint it thinly or even slightly dry brush on the surface. So as I work around here I can paint the lighter areas in of these greens and leave the blues in between. I can make the marks very much about the bunches of leaves and as opposed to the acrylics, the oils have remained soft as well, so I can blend the colours in together because they won't have dried underneath. Again, it's a very big plus in this case. This technique is very akin to dry brush and it's called scumbling. Scumbling is when we use the tip of the brush, almost like dry brush as I'm doing now, just to push that paint into the canvas, work it up a little bit and get this textural effect. Now I'm going to add some more cobalt and some more magenta to this to finish off the colours surrounding and also add to the water. I'm going to start on the water now, and with the water I like to work both vertical and horizontal strokes. For clear smooth water I do my verticals first and then start to add horizontals over the top. For more faster moving water you'll see I use a much more varied brush stroke, a much more aggressive brush stroke. But here I'm doing these little tickles downwards to get the effect of light and reflections, and then I'll come across with the horizontal brush strokes. So now my horizontal brush strokes, you see, are going across the vertical now to get the glassy feeling of this water. Later, to really enhance this, we can add little specks of floating foam or light or even leaves. As we're not using black, we'll be making our greys by mainly using blues and browns. These will give wonderful greys, and the different blues and different browns will give a whole variety of different greys. So here I'm going to use ultramarine and burnt sienna to make a darker colour here and start making a lovely dark grey, which I can make warmer by adding more brown or bluer by adding more of the ultramarine.
Define these shadows a bit more again, a bit bluer, so a bit more ultramarine, a bit stronger with the blue there. Got to move my head round it, and I'm going to get in front of the canvas a bit. I've got to move my head round. I've got to either go that way or this way to stop the sun from being in my eyes.
In most cases in a landscape, the colours will come from warm in the foreground to cool into the background. The only time this changes really will be for a sunset or sunrise, where you get the warm in the background, cool in the foreground. So here I'm making a mix now for the background to come through gently, a nice pale blue-green, which we're going to use cerulean blue, some lemon yellow and a little bit of the previous blue mix. And we're going to gradually bring that in by again gently tickling it through and blending it into the previous colours around it and down and round and through to the foreground. In our painting we're constantly using many methods. We're using light against dark, warm against cool and rough against smooth. Here though we're in the background using the warms against the cools as well. Even though they're nearly all cools in the background and very subtle mid-tones, I can use now a warmer grey against these cooler greys. So I'm going to add a little bit more magenta now to this colour to add a slightly warmer colour that will make those coolers seem cooler. So rather than add a lot of warm to make things warmer, I can add something cooler, and to make things cooler I can add something warm. So let's do that very thing. I'm now going to add some burnt sienna to it to bring this colour forward and make a much warmer grey, and this warmer colour will push those lovely cool colours back further into the background. Now we'll do similar with the leaves in the background and add a warm yellow. I'm going to use chrome, but it could be cadmium. If you've got cadmium, it's just the same as chrome really. We'll add that to these greens in the background to bring out the warmer sunlight. As I work down now into the foreground and the pool in the front here, you'll notice that I immediately go to vertical brushstrokes because I'm starting to do water again, smooth water. So it's vertical and horizontal brushstrokes to get the effect of that deep blue water. We do the reflections first and then the surface. Now we start to move to this vast amount of space in the background. As I'm going to be painting light over dark, which I can do with this material with both acrylics and oils, I need to paint all my midtones in and some of my darker. So I'm going to start mixing now the midtones, greens and blues for the background here in washes at first. So I'm going to use my blue greys for this still, making my greys with both browns and blues. We're going to use cerulean and the burnt sienna at first, and then go even stronger and start to add in cerulean with the ultramarine and burnt sienna. And then at the end of it, to bring it a bit bluer, we'll come back to add some more cerulean in. So it's a balance of gradually mixing the various blues and browns backwards and forwards with a little bit of white to get the variety of blue greys that we want. Again, you'll notice my brushstrokes. I'm making the brushstrokes about those leaves still, and I can adjust these greys warmer or cool whenever I wish, adding more ultramarine as I just did up there, or even gradually adding some yellows. Possibly I'll be adding some yellow ochre soon to make a more yellowy blue grey as well. As I work up these colours, you'll notice that I'm making them stronger and stronger, and I'll be adding more and more paint into it. In other words, I'll be making the paint thicker and more opaque. In many ways this technique is very similar to using acrylics. In acrylics we use water to thin it down, with the oils we're using terps. The difference is that of course the oils will remain wet, whereas the acrylics will dry, so we can still blend back into the oil. Now I start to add some green directly. We take some emerald and start to add it in with the greys that we've been using to tint this soft mid-background tone. In other words, I don't want strong colours yet. I'm still working my soft background light, and I'll bring on the pure colours later. This produces a very attractive painting this way, because we can work this technique of fat over lean to gradually bring up our soft background light and give the foreground much more body and strength. So we're working from cools in the background to warmer and warmer into the foreground, working from thinner paint in the background to heavier, thicker paint as it comes over the surface or towards the foreground.
Right, I need to start really working on these colours a lot more. Take some alizarin, and the light is coming through here. I can start making things a lot stronger. Much stronger blue. I'm going to take some Prussian with the alizarin, so I'm really going to start pushing some colours now.
So now we're really starting to make much stronger colours. Alizarin crimson and Prussian blue I've just started to use here for the darks, so we can now push the darks against the lights. At this stage I start to sing the praises of painting in plein air. Of course one can't in every example. If I'm painting young children moving about or animals or things like that, apart from doing quick studies, I've got to use photographs. There are some things I have to do in the studio. But painting out of doors on plein air is much more preferable. You see more, you feel more, the atmosphere is better, you see more colour. The light is changing, there are more difficulties, yes, but the actual involvement of painting outside is a sheer joy. So this becomes a good example now of the versatility of oil paints. We can work the lights over the darks, or in this case the darks back into the lights. If we paint softly and gently and thicker with paint, we can add darks thickly over the top, or we can blend them gently into the background. Remember my advice about when you have a colour on the brush, use it elsewhere. Don't waste it. If it's there and it's somewhere else, use it.
There's so much going on in this picture. It's like the big one yesterday, but there's much going on in a smaller painting.
So I'm gradually building up my background from these thinner coats using terps, the thin lean coats and the fat over them, working it up layer by layer and making the colour stronger and stronger. The more pigment I put into the mixture, the stronger the colour is going to be and the less the dark will show through. The actual experience of painting out of doors does push you far more, but it's far more rewarding as well. When I'm painting from photographs so often bleach out the colours, and it's then that I can come back to my experience of painting out of doors and see those colours. I know what's going to be there. I can find them within the photographs and explore and experiment far more. It's much easier. So let me give you a few tips on using photographs in painting. When you take your photographs, take 3. one with a lot of sky, one with a lot of ground of the same scene, and one with both in if you can, because the camera adjusts accordingly. The one with a lot of sky will have a very dark ground, one with a lot of ground will have a very light sky, so you won't get true colours. Now I'm going to start working in the top right of the painting, pure light, so much more pure colours. I'm going to be working into the sunlight there, which is in my eyes as it is, so it's quite difficult. But this gets far more exciting, so I'll be adding far more stronger, pure colours.
Magenta, add it to white. Really start to try and find some lovely colours there. And if I start to play the warms against the cools here.
So lovely bright colours that are going to vibrate against each other. Here I'm going to use pure magenta and a little white, and then I'm going to work a cream into it, in this case a cool cream. Remember that in every colour there are colour hues, warm and cool. So I'm going to use lemon yellow, which is a cool yellow, with the white to make a cool cream, and work that into the magenta as well. Later we'll work even cool blues, that is a cerulean blue and so on, into that as well. And putting all of these colours together, the warm against the cool, the light against the dark, will give a wonderful vibrance. Then, as this is the brightest part of the painting, I take some pure titanium white and start to link that in. If I use it thickly and gently, it'll go on purely. If I blend it slightly with the tip of the brush by pushing in more, then we start to mix the colours together at the edges. These are the most pleasurable parts for me. This is when I start painting with light, not with colour. Once we get the underpainting done, I feel that I'm actually using light rather than colour, because these highlights are almost like painting with pure light, as you can see here. Remember how I keep saying, put the right colours in the right shapes in the right places relevant one to another, and the painting will appear. Providing I put the right colours over and around and with each other, then like a jigsaw the painting will just appear.
The lights behind really get this effect of light. Up to here where it's lighter. It's not easy for me because I'm actually painting it and I get to look at the sun, paint it. So that's not helping me at all. Get some turquoise mixed here. And then we go back to the cerulean.
At this stage I remind you that we're not using any black. We're making our dark colours and blacks by using very deep colours, such as Prussian blue and burnt umber. Of course it's possible to do a painting with far less colours. In some of my other films I discuss the use of a limited palette, where we're only using just a few colours to do the maximum. The more colours we have, the more complicated it becomes, so perhaps it's better just to start with a few colours at the beginning. These colours that I've shown you on this palette though will do everything you could want in almost every situation, that's the point. Now it's time to really start some of the purer colours, so I'm going to start adding neat burnt sienna now to my trees and to the foreground to bring out the foreground as well. Of course we've been using burnt sienna already in mixing it with some of the blues, the Prussian and the ultramarine to make darks. Now we're starting to use it more purely. Later we'll use it with a bit of white and even with some yellow ochre. Remember my advice as usual, warmer at the front, cooler at the background, more detail at the front and less detail at the background, more out of focus at the background, normally. Now we're going to our stronger and warmer greens, so I'm going to take some emerald green and add a little bit of burnt sienna to that, and that'll give me a lovely mossy green. There are so many ways we can make differing greens, warm and cool greens. Yellow ochre and a blue would also give me lovely warm greens. Yellow ochre and cerulean, yellow ochre and cobalt, yellow ochre and ultramarine would also give me lovely warm deep greens. Until now we've used mainly the cool yellow, which was lemon yellow, but now I want to start using much warmer yellows and oranges as we come forward with the sunlight in these trees to bring the whole thing forward. And if we put the warmer yellows in, the cooler yellows are going to seem cooler as well. So now I'm going to start using chrome or cadmium yellow, they're both equally the same really, and I can use that warm yellow in the foreground here, the sunlight shining through these leaves to give this feeling of cool and warm.
I want to keep it pure, which isn't easy because it wants to mix with the dirtier colours underneath. I'm being pulled to paint parts I wouldn't normally paint because the light is changing so fast and I know I've got to get those bits done.
So as I show you now, we have greater versatility with both acrylics and oils. We can paint lights over darks, darks back over lights. We can do that immediately. We can wipe out the paint, especially with oils, which remain softer and wet far longer. Acrylics can be a problem in that way, that they dry faster, but equally, of course, you can glaze more quickly with acrylics. And you can see now that we can even glaze with oils, and by adding linseed oil to a mixture of the white spirit and the oil paint, we can make even more brilliant and liquid glazes.
Very different sort of scene to yesterday's in that there's more lights going on here. Start to indicate some individual leaves and ferns now.
Now I'm going to start using some burnt sienna. This term originally came from earth from sienna that was burnt and made a rich red brown colour. Of course it's made differently now. In this case we're going to use the burnt sienna to bring forward the foreground and to bring out the trees and bring the whole painting forward, in fact, and push the background back because warms will come forward of the blues. An interesting exception to this was when the famous artist Joshua Reynolds painted the Blue Boy, deliberately making the blue come forward in the painting and making it a primary part of the artwork. But normally we find that the warmest colours will come to the front and the coolest will recede further back. This gives us atmosphere. So as I add my burnt sienna, I'm able to brush out the darks and the blacks of the original priming and glaze over those, but I'm using fairly heavy paint so that if I brush the paint out more by scumbling, as we discussed earlier, I can also link in the paint to the greens. Because the greens in oil paint are still soft and malleable, I can bring it into the edge of those greens and just blend them out into the brown, which gives me a lovely effect here, as you can see. Again, whilst you have the colour mixed and whilst you have the colour on your brush, do go ahead and put it everywhere that it is in the painting. There's no point in cleaning your brush, washing it off again and then having to make new paint up. So when you have a colour on your brush, wherever it is in the painting, use it. And then you can always adjust it slightly as well. Now after this I'm going to go on to a colour called yellow ochre. Yellow ochre and burnt sienna are two of our main colours in nearly all forms of painting, figurative paintings. Now yellow ochre is a wonderful colour because it's very golden. I'm going to now start adding that to my painting to give it a lot more golden warmth compared to the more yellow greens of the lemon yellow earlier and the chrome or cadmium yellow. The yellow ochre is far richer, far browner, far more golden. As you can see here, as I put it on, it makes the other yellows seem much cooler. This is the business of opposites and putting one colour against another. This is where the business of colour hues comes in, that every colour has a warm and cool end at each end, lemon yellow being a cool yellow and the yellow ochre being a very warm yellow. As when painting the leaves, I'm now painting, or feel I'm painting, with light rather than colour, because I'm tickling that brush across all the surfaces and letting that colour flood as the light shines between the leaves, across branches, across other leaves on the ground, across rocks, across soil. It's actually becoming a flood of light. And I do this with all of the lighter colours, so once I've established my midtones and go down towards the dark, I can come back with my highlights, and I am literally painting with light in my imagination.
Bits of gold coming in the sun, shining across the tree as it comes down. The brush marks about what you're painting. As I'm painting in between grass here, I'm going to start making grass-like marks, and then where it's leaf-like I'm going to be putting more leafy marks.
I'm not sure whether you could hear that properly, but what I'm saying now is that my marks are actually becoming more drawing. I'm starting to work about grass ends and details and twigs and branches. So not only am I now painting the light, I'm also painting about edges and surfaces and textures and objects. And I've now changed to a mixture of magenta and white to really bring out these light highlights and the sun shining through onto the tops of rocks and across branches and twigs. Now I'm truly painting fat over lean. The paint on my brush is almost directly off the palette. There's only a little bit of white spirit to make it fluid, and I can paint it on like heavy cream. So I'm actually starting to build up a texture. It's not quite three-dimensional, but if you're using a knife or you wanted to use that paint more thickly, you could do. You could actually start to build up the branches and the rocks and so on to be almost textural if you wished with direct paint. So the fat over the lean. You'll also find that some colours take longer to dry than others. This can be a nuisance when you're waiting to varnish a painting. It can take weeks and even months for some colours.
Lots of little brush strokes, gradually putting one colour against another, with the right colours in the right places and the right shapes, and hopefully the picture is going to appear one colour which, if I put a warm on, it's going to make the cools cooler. So if I start to put more warm into there, then the cools in the background will seem cooler.
Now it's time to start on my deeper darks, so I'm going to go to my deepest blue, which is the Prussian blue. This works with watercolour as well, and I'm going to add to that Prussian blue some burnt sienna. We can go even darker than the burnt sienna by adding either raw umber or burnt umber. That will give you a slightly greener colour or a more browny colour dark. At this stage I'm now working far more towards the darks, so I can start to pick out the darker shadows and shapes in between things, and I'm coming to my final dark areas. So we've worked from the midtones outwards towards the lights, towards the darks, and at the finish of the painting we complete our final darks and finish with the highlights.
Now the painting starts to take shape, we can actually start to work more details. The light has totally changed up here now. The sun's gone behind some more trees, and I've got to look into painting this background a lot more differently. I need this sort of blue-grey now, which has changed colour as well in the meantime with the sun going behind the trees. So what do I need? Oh, I'm going to take some cerulean and magenta again and just see how light it is. It's not far off. And hopefully this cream will also help to play against.
Now I need to find the colour of the stones and rocks, and I think in this case a blue-grey, a simple one, cerulean and burnt sienna will give me that grey. It's a nice soft gentle grey, a little touch of white into it perhaps, and that will do the job as we see here. Then back to my sunlight through the leaves, and of course the sun is changing constantly here, so we're going to mix that white with lemon yellow again to give the cool cream, the bright cream, which will seem like sunlit leaves as the sun shines across them here now. As an impressionist, not a photorealist, I'm not painting my picture exactly, I'm not painting a photograph exactly, I'm not reproducing it. I'm making an impression of it, I'm making my marks about those things, I'm making sure that they're in the right place for me in the composition on the canvas. So these leaves are painted as in parasols. I work them across, spreading beautifully as the branches will. I'm not copying those branches exactly, but I'm making sure that they are individual marks about what I am painting. They never become a pattern, they never become just repeated, they're always different and individual. After the cream I add more emerald green, and then I'm going to go on to my oranges to get even more warm colours.
I'll make some very, very light orange, and I'm going to change down brushes now to be slightly finer. What I want to do is to whip in some of these branches, these darker branches if I can. And of course, again, this would be the advantage of acrylics. The acrylics would dry by now, and I can put these darks through much more easily. Bring these edges of these roots up and around, just looking at the tree here. Start to feel some ferns in the distance as well.
Now I'm working down to my final details, putting in the branches and the twigs and smaller areas of little leaves in the distance. I shall then move back from this cadmium orange and white and go towards my turquoise and work on the sky reflecting on the grasses. Many greens are very blue. As I say, in all colours we have the different hues, cool and warms, so there can be very warm brown grasses and very blue green grasses. In this case I'm going to add turquoise onto those grasses. Again, whilst using this colour, this turquoise, make sure you use it anywhere else that it's required as well. Possibly a little bit in the water here and there, and certainly on some of the leaves. The warmth of the leaves will work very well against the cool of the turquoise, the reflected light. Not just reflected sunlight, but the turquoise, of course, is the reflected sky, the blue. The sunlight is the cream. It isn't until you see the cerulean against the turquoise that you realise how much more warmer the cerulean is, as is cobalt warmer than the cerulean, and as is ultramarine warmer than the cobalt. My brush marks are now becoming far more varied, and the filbert is useful for this because I can use the thin edge of the filbert for grasses and so on, and I can use the wider edge for the broader leaves. If I need to, I can go back to a small round.
So I'm using what I've got here, these little blocks of green, to bring the grasses out of.
So let's talk about using these light colours. I very seldom use just plain white. There's always a slight tint of colour, because wherever there is light, there cannot be black and there cannot be pure white, because that light will be reflecting a colour. So I'm now going to put some of the sparkle into the water in the distance, and take white and add a tiny touch of colour to it. Always take your lightest colour first and then add your darker colour to that, or you'll end up with a gallon of the colour and not just a small amount you require. With this in mind, very often when I'm trying to paint sparkling whites, as in the sparkle on water or surf, waves at their edges, I don't just paint white. I start with my very light creams, often adding very light pinks and very light blues. Then, if I have to, at the very end, I'll add some pure white for the sparkle. But adding those colours together gives that vibrance, as does all broken colour.
Sparkling down through here. So we're on our final marks, I suppose, really. Take a break. We need to just have a little walk. Been sitting up too long, so we need just a little break. Excuse me a moment. But I've been painting now about 2 hours, 3 hours. It's long enough to have a seat. Right, even a few minutes walk just shows me some of the things I need. And I do need some stronger yellows going on.
So, having taken a little break and a walk and stood back from the painting, which you need to do, you can't just stay up close to work all the time, I realised that I needed far more of the stronger yellows. So either you can take chrome or cadmium yellow. And you see here I start to add those yellows against those other cooler colours and warmer colours as an intermediate yellow, which brings out the sunlight. I'm really lathering this paint on now. I'm painting with impasto. I'm actually painting these leaves up almost as if they're built onto the surface. I remain using my brushes, but at this stage we could use a painting knife to really lay these textures on. With acrylics I use sponge for texturing, but this is far more difficult with oils and much messier.
And just now I was talking about orange. It's just what we can do, because I haven't used any cadmium oranges yet. You can use cadmium red and orange. Let's take some cadmium orange and try and get a nice clean bright orange, a touch of white into it.
Now it's time towards the end of the painting to really start pushing my warms, so we're going to go directly to cadmium orange, pure cadmium orange. I have been using it with a bit of white, now I'm just going to use it purely, and then I'm going to go even warmer and start to use some pure cadmium red. It's great to really push back those other cool colours, and to make colours that seemed warm before that will now seem much cooler, because the red is our brightest.
Just mix those together, see how warm we can go. To these colours which I haven't done yet. So much nicer, you can see how that red works straight away there. Really brings this whole thing forward.
When you've finished your painting, give it plenty of time to dry. I nearly always give mine a coat of varnish. I prefer a gloss varnish, and I usually use a retouching varnish rather than a mastic, because this can be painted over again or even removed with white spirit gently, so that you can clean the painting easily, or you can repaint or add more work to it later. As to how long the painting requires depends upon the thickness of your paint, the warmth and humidity that it's drying in, but also the colours, because some colours take longer to dry than others. White takes quite a long time to dry, for instance. So give it plenty of time, make sure that it is touch dry completely, and any thicker areas are dry as well. I tend to use an aerosol spray varnish rather than brushing it on, and I find that 2 coats is usually enough. Better to have a couple of fine, thin, even coats than risk the danger of puddles. Of course, always make sure it's laid flat and there's no dust around.
Because it is almost a fairy tale light that's going on in here now. It's beautiful. Not to overwork it. Just a painting, fairly figurative painting, full of light. And I wouldn't have got the same effect using palette now, painting light, as I was intending doing. Autumn colours. And there we go. I'll be tickling it too much. So it's what we have to do. Well, there we go. I think we'll call that one done. That's the view. And here's the finished painting. So here's the finished painting, and I think tomorrow I've got enough paint left. I might have got a palette knife or a painting knife just to use up the paint. This one just didn't deserve it. It was too textural. I wanted to use brushes. So again, we're choosing the method and the technique for the medium and for the subject. How beautiful a place can you get to paint? I keep saying, come and join me here, have a painting holiday with me. Well, the light's now totally gone. It's very even, but still extremely beautiful, as you can see. So we go home.